Hi there, welcome to Fantasy Hub. I'm Mia, your storyteller. Today's story is filled with heartache, discovery, and a twist you won't see coming. So let's begin.
It was a Tuesday morning in Key West, and the Ocean Breeze Cafe was bustling with the usual mix of tourists clutching their phones and locals nursing their third cup of coffee. I had just finished a particularly challenging dive, a 1940s cargo ship that had yielded nothing but rusted metal and broken dreams. My wetsuit was still damp in my truck, and I smelled faintly of salt water and diesel fuel, but I needed caffeine more than I needed to shower. That's when I saw her. She was sitting alone at a corner table, her dark hair catching the morning light streaming through the salt-stained windows. A stack of marine archaeology journals sat beside her laptop, and she was taking methodical notes, while eating what looked like the cafe's famous key lime pie. There was something magnetic about the way she moved, precise, deliberate, like every gesture had purpose. I ordered my usual black coffee and, on impulse, pointed to the pie display. "I'll have what she's having," I told Marco, the owner, nodding toward the woman in the corner. "The professor?" Marco grinned. "Good choice. She's been coming in here every Tuesday for 3 months, always orders the same thing." Michelle's her name, marine archaeologist from the university. A professor, of course she was. I looked down at my faded tank top and shorts, suddenly conscious of the stark difference between us. But something about her drew me in, and before I could talk myself out of it, I was walking toward her table. "Excuse me," I said, balancing my coffee and pie. "I couldn't help but notice you're reading about shipwreck preservation techniques." "I'm Natalie. I work in marine salvage." She looked up, and I felt my breath catch. Her eyes were the color of deep ocean water, somewhere between blue and green, and they held an intelligence that made my pulse quicken. "Michelle Rodriguez," she said, gesturing to the empty chair across from her. "Please sit. It's rare to meet someone else who spends their time thinking about what lies beneath the waves." I sat down, trying to ignore how her slight Spanish accent made my name sound like music. "So, marine archaeology? That's gotta be more glamorous than what I do." "Which is?" She tilted her head, genuinely curious. "Treasure hunting, mostly. Weekend dives, searching for anything valuable enough to pay the bills." I took a bite of the pie, and the tangy sweetness exploded across my tongue. "Though I have to say, this might be the best treasure I've found all week." Michelle laughed, a rich sound that made warmth spread through my chest. "You know, there's an ongoing debate in my field about salvage operations versus preservation. Most of my colleagues would probably have some choice words about treasure hunting. And what about you?" I asked, leaning forward slightly. "What are your choice words?" She was quiet for a moment, studying me with those ocean eyes. "I think," she said slowly, "that the ocean doesn't give up its secrets easily. Anyone brave enough to go down there and bring something back deserves respect, regardless of their motivation." That's when I knew I was in trouble. We talked for 2 hours that first morning. Michelle told me about her research on colonial era shipping routes, how she'd grown up in Miami with parents who emigrated from Cuba, and how she'd fallen in love with the ocean during a childhood visit to her grandmother in Havana. I found myself sharing stories I rarely told anyone, about my father teaching me to dive when I was 12, about the heart condition that ended my dreams of commercial diving, about the way the underwater world felt like the only place where I could truly breathe. "A heart condition?" Michelle's brow furrowed with concern. "Is it serious?" "Serious enough," I said, unconsciously touching my chest where the scar from my pacemaker surgery lay hidden beneath my shirt. "Irregular rhythm. The doctors say diving is risky, but ... I shrugged. "Some risks are worth taking." She reached across the table and touched my hand briefly. "The contact sent electricity up my arm. I understand. The ocean calls to some of us in ways that can't be ignored." We made plans to meet again the following Tuesday, then Wednesday, then Thursday. Before I knew it, our casual coffee meetings had become the highlight of my week. Michelle would share her latest research, and I'd tell her about my dives, describing the coral formations and marine life I encountered. She had a way of listening that made me feel like every word mattered. 3 weeks into our friendship, she surprised me. "I want to see your world," she said as we walked along the harbor after lunch. "Would you take me diving?" I stopped walking. "Michelle, I appreciate the interest, but academic diving and what I do are completely different. It can be dangerous." "I'm certified," she said, pulling out her diving credentials. "Advanced open water rescue diver Nitrix certified, I've logged over 200 dives for my research. I looked at her credentials, then at her face. There was determination. There and something else. A spark of adventure I hadn't noticed before. All right, I said finally, but we do this my way. No exceptions. The following Saturday, we met at the marina at dawn. Michelle arrived wearing a wetsuit that fit her like a second skin, her hair braided back severely. She looked professional, capable, and absolutely stunning. I tried to focus on equipment checks rather than the way the neoprene hugged her curves. So, where are we going? She asked as we loaded gear onto my boat, Second Chance. There's a Civil War blockade runner about 15 miles out. She went down in 1863, and I've been working her for months. The currents can be tricky and visibility isn't great, but she's yielded some interesting finds. As we headed out too. See, Michelle stood at the bow, face turned toward the wind. There was something wild about her like this, freed from the academic setting of coffee shops and libraries. I found myself stealing glances at her profile, wondering what it would be like to touch the curve of her neck, to taste the salt spray. On her lips. The dive site was choppy, but nothing we couldn't handle. We anchored over the wreck and began our equipment final checks. As I helped Michelle with her tank, my hands brushed against her shoulders, and I felt her shiver slightly. You okay? I asked. Perfect, she said, but her voice was breathier than usual. The wreck lay in 60 feet of water, her broken hull creating an artificial reef that teemed with marine life. Michelle moved through the water with practiced grace, her movements economical and purposeful. She wasn't just observing the wreck, she was reading it, understanding its story in ways I'd never considered. We spent 40 minutes exploring the debris field. I showed her where I'd found a brass compass and some coins. She pointed out structural details that revealed how the ship had gone down, probably taking cannon fire from a Union vessel. When she got excited about something, she would grab my arm, and even through our thick gloves, I could feel the connection. On the surface, as we floated during our safety stop, she pulled her regulator out and grinned at me. That was incredible. The way the coral has integrated with the metal structure, it's like the ocean is reclaiming history. Different perspective than treasure hunting, I'm guessing. Completely, you see value in individual artifacts. I see the story they tell together. She moved closer in the water, treading efficiently. But maybe that's why we work well together. Different ways of seeing the same mystery. Together, the word hung between us like a promise hour. Diving partnership quickly became something more intense than friendship. Michelle started joining me on weekend salvage operations, bringing her archaeological expertise to my treasure hunting. I found myself looking forward to our time underwater together almost as much as our conversations afterward. The sexual tension had been building for weeks, crackling between us during our long boat rides and lingering looks over coffee. But it was Michelle who finally acknowledged what was happening. We were at her apartment, going over charts for a new wreck. Sites she'd discovered in historical shipping records. Her place was exactly what I'd expected. Neat, organized, filled with books and maritime artifacts. But there were personal touches too. Family photos, a guitar in the corner, artwork from local Keys artists. This is beautiful, I said, examining. A painting of a sunset over the Gulf. My ex-girlfriend painted it, Michelle said casually, then froze as she realized what she'd revealed. I turned to look at her. Ex-girlfriend? She set down the chart she'd been holding, her cheeks flushing slightly. Yes, I should have mentioned it sooner, but I wasn't sure if you dot. If I what? I stepped closer. If you were interested in women and me. The vulnerability in her voice made my heart race. I closed the distance between us, reaching up to touch her face gently. Michelle, I've been interested in you since that first morning in the cafe. I just wasn't sure if you were interested in someone like me, someone like you. Her hand covered mine. You mean someone brave enough to dive into dangerous waters for the chance of finding something extraordinary? Someone who makes me feel more alive than I have in years? Before I could respond, she kissed me. It was soft at first, tentative, but when I kissed her back, she deepened it, her arms winding around my neck. She tasted like coffee and possibility, and when she pressed against me, I felt like I was free-falling through clear blue water. I've wanted to do that for weeks, she whispered against my lips. Then why did you wait so long? I asked, trailing kisses along her jaw. Because, she said, her breath hitching as I found the sensitive spot just below her ear. I knew once I started I wouldn't want to stop. That night changed everything. Making love with Michelle was like discovering a new world beneath the familiar surface. She was passionate but tender, confident but vulnerable, and the way she touched me made me feel like I was the most precious treasure she'd ever found. Afterward, we lay tangled in her sheets, and I traced patterns on her bare shoulder while she told me about her previous relationships. There was someone serious, she said. Carmen, we were together for 3 years. She was also an academic, very focused on her career, but she wanted different things than I did. What kind of things? Marriage, kids, a house in the suburbs, a normal life. Michelle turned in my arms so we were face to face. She said my obsession with shipwrecks was childish, that I needed to grow up and focus on what really mattered. I felt a flash of anger toward this Carmen, whoever she was. Your passion for your work isn't childish. It's what makes you extraordinary. Is that how you see me? Extraordinary? Michelle, I said, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You're the most extraordinary person I've ever met. The way you see history in pile of old wood and metal. The way you make everything seem like an adventure worth taking. You're incredible. She kissed me again, deeper this time, and I felt her walls coming down completely. Our relationship intensified quickly after that. We spent nearly every free moment together, either diving or planning dives or recovering from dives in Michelle's bed. She introduced me to the academic side of marine archaeology, teaching me to see historical context in the artifacts I'd been collecting for years. I showed her the practical side of salvage work, the techniques for safely recovering delicate items from challenging environments. But it wasn't just the work that bonded us. Michelle had a way of making ordinary moments feel special. She would surprise me with picnic lunches during long boat rides. She taught me to salsa dance in her living room. She listened to my fears about my heart condition without trying to fix me or tell me to be more careful. And the sex was incredible. Michelle was uninhibited in bed, adventurous and giving. She would whisper Spanish endearments while we made love, her accent thick with desire. She knew exactly how to touch me to make me come apart in her arms, and I loved discovering what made her moan my name. 2 months into our relationship, Michelle got the opportunity of a lifetime. The university was partnering with the State Archaeological Commission on a major project, the excavation of a 16th century Spanish galleon that had been discovered in protected waters off the coast. It's the find of the decade, she told me excitedly as we sat in our usual spot at Ocean Breeze Cafe. The Santa Isabella. She went down in 1571 with a cargo hold full of New World treasures. Silver, gold, precious gems, but more importantly, personal effects, tools, weapons. A complete snapshot of colonial life. I should have been excited for her. Instead, I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. Protected waters? Completely off limits to salvage operations. This is pure research, Natalie. We'll catalog everything, study it in context, preserve it properly. It's exactly the kind of work I got into archaeology to do. The subtext was clear. This was important work, academic work, legitimate work. Not like what I did. That's wonderful, I said, trying to keep my voice even. When do you start? Next week? And Natalie ... She reached across the table to take my hand. They've asked me to lead the project. It's a huge promotion, essentially a fast track to tenure, but it means I'll be working 7 days a week for the next 6 months. 6 months? The words hit me like a cold current. What does that mean for us? It means we'll have to be patient. This project can make my career, but I don't want to lose what we have. She squeezed my hand. We'll make it work. But I could already feel her slipping away, pulled toward a world where I didn't belong. The next few weeks were a steady and growing distance. Michelle threw herself into the Santa Isabella project with an intensity that left little room for anything else. Our Tuesday coffee dates became rush check-ins. Our weekend diving trips were replaced by her weekend research sessions. Even when we did manage to spend time together, her mind was clearly elsewhere. I tried to be understanding. I knew how important this project was to her career, but watching her pour all her passion into work that explicitly excluded everything I did for a living was harder than I'd expected. The breaking point came 3 weeks into the project. Michelle had been working 18-hour days, and we hadn't spent a night together in over a week. I decided to surprise her at the marine lab where the artifacts were being processed. I found her in the main processing room, bent over a table where dozens of silver coins were laid out in precise rows. She was photographing each one, taking detailed notes, handling them with reverence. These are incredible, she said without looking up when I walked in. Pieces of 8 from the Lima Mint, some of them in perfect condition. Do you know how rare it is to find colonial silver in this state of preservation? I looked at the coins, similar to ones I'd pulled from dozens of wrecks and sold to collectors. To me, they were valuable but not miraculous. To Michelle, they were historical treasures beyond price. They're beautiful, I said, though something in my tone must have given away my thoughts. She finally looked up at me, and I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. But I also saw something else, a kind of professional excitement that I'd never been able to inspire. You don't get it, do you? She said, not unkindly. This isn't just about the monetary value. These coins were in someone's pocket when they died. They represent trade routes, economic systems, entire civilizations. They're priceless. I understand the historical significance, I said carefully. But Michelle, coins like these, I found dozens of them. They're not that uncommon. Her expression changed, becoming cooler. Found them and sold them to private collectors, you mean? Scattered them to the winds without any regard for their archaeological context. The accusation stung because it was partially true. I've always been careful with preservation, and I've never taken anything from protected sites. But you've never contributed to the scientific understanding either. You've treated history like a commodity. We stared at each other across the table full of silver coins, and I felt the gulf between our worlds opening wider. Maybe I should go, I said finally. Maybe you should. I left the lab feeling like I'd been gut punched. The woman I was falling in love with had just made it clear that she saw my life's work as ethically questionable at best. The next 2 weeks were hell. Michelle and I barely spoke, exchanging only brief, polite texts. I threw myself into solo diving trips, taking on more dangerous jobs than I normally would have considered. Part of me was punishing myself, and part of me was trying to prove that what I did mattered, that I brought valuable things back from the deep. It was during one of these reckless dives that my heart condition nearly killed me. I was working a 1920s rum runner that had gone down during Prohibition, diving alone, in challenging conditions. The current was stronger than I'd expected, and I was pushing my bottom time limits, trying to reach a section of the wreck that looked promising. I was at 90 feet when my heart started racing irregularly. At first, I thought it was just the adrenaline of a difficult dive, but as I tried to ascend, the arrhythmia got worse. My chest felt tight, and I was struggling to breathe even through my regulator. I managed to get to my safety stop depth, but hanging there in the water, watching my dive computer count down the required decompression time, I genuinely thought I might die. Somehow, I made it to the surface and back to shore. But by the time I got to the hospital, I was in full cardiac arrest. I woke up 2 days later with a new pacemaker and Michelle sitting beside my hospital bed, tears streaming down her face. You idiot, she said, gripping my hand. You beautiful, stubborn, reckless idiot. What were you thinking, diving alone in those conditions? I was thinking, I said, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube, that maybe I needed to prove something. Prove what? That you could kill yourself over some stupid disagreement? I looked at her, really looked at her. Her hair was a mess. She was wearing the same clothes she'd had on 2 days ago, and her eyes were red from crying. She looked like she'd been sitting in that chair since they brought me in. How long have you been here? I asked, since Marco called me from the cafe. He saw the ambulance take you away. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Natalie, I'm so sorry about what I said at the lab. I was tired and stressed, and I took it out on you. But nothing we disagreed about was worth risking your life over. Michelle, no, let me finish. I was wrong. What you do isn't just treasure hunting. You're preserving history too, just in a different way. And even if you weren't, it wouldn't matter. What matters is that you're passionate about it, that it makes you who you are. I fell in love with a woman who risks everything to bring beauty up from the depths. I don't want to change that about you. She was crying again, and I felt my own eyes fill with tears. I love you, I said. I've been afraid to say it because I thought we were too different, that you'd realize you could do better than a treasure hunter with a bad heart. Natalie Chen, she said, leaning down to kiss me softly, you are the best thing I've ever found. And I'm never letting you go diving alone again. My recovery took 6 weeks, during which Michelle barely left my side. She brought her work too. My apartment, processing artifacts and writing reports from my kitchen table while I lay on the couch, frustrated by my forced inactivity. You don't have to babysit me, I told her one afternoon as she helped me change the dressing on my surgical site. I'm not babysitting. I'm taking care of the woman I love. She pressed a gentle kiss to the scar over my pacemaker. Besides, I like working here. It's quieter than the lab, and the view is better. She was looking at me when she said it, and I felt that familiar flutter of desire, stronger now because I'd almost lost the chance to feel it again. The doctor said no strenuous activity for another 2 weeks, I said regretfully. I know. Michelle's smile was wicked. But he didn't say anything about unstrenuous activity. She proceeded to show me just how creative she could be within the bounds of my medical restrictions, and by the time she was finished, I was breathless for entirely different reasons than heart problems. As I recovered, we talked about everything, our fears, our dreams, our future together. Michelle told me about the pressure she felt to succeed in academia, how she sometimes felt like she had to work twice as hard as her male colleagues to be taken seriously. I shared my insecurities about my health, my worry that I was living on borrowed time. Do you want to know what I think? Michelle said one evening as we watched the sunset from my balcony. I think you're not living on borrowed time. I think you're living on earned time. Every day you choose to keep going, keep diving, keep exploring. That's time you've earned by being brave. Is that your professional opinion, Dr. Rodriguez? That's my personal opinion, Miss Chen. Though, if you want my professional opinion, ... Coach, she grinned. I think we should go back to work together. I have an idea. Michelle's idea was ambitious. And, frankly, a little crazy. She wanted to combine our skills on a joint project, using my salvage expertise to safely recover artifacts from historically significant wrecks, then applying her archaeological methods to study them properly. Think about it, she said, spreading charts across my dining table. There are dozens of wrecks in these waters that are historically important, but not legally protected. We could create a new model for ethical salvage archaeology. Your university colleagues would have a field day with that, I pointed out. Ethical salvage sounds like an oxymoron to most academics. Some of them, yes. But there are others who are starting to recognize that pure preservation isn't always possible. Sometimes controlled recovery is better than letting things deteriorate. On the ocean floor, she pointed to a spot on the chart. Like this one? The Maria Fernanda, a Spanish merchant vessel from 1698. She's in international waters, which means she's fair game for salvage operations. But she's also historically significant. One of the last ships to make the colonial trade run before the War of Spanish Succession changed everything. I studied the chart. The wreck was in deep water, technically challenging, but not impossible. What are you proposing? A partnership. We recover artifacts using your methods, but we document everything in archaeological context using mine. Then we publish our findings and donate the most significant pieces to maritime museums. And the valuable stuff? Michelle was quiet for a moment. We sell enough to fund the operation and our living expenses. But we keep detailed records of everything, and we focus on preservation and education, not just profit. It was a compromise that would satisfy neither the pure treasure hunters nor the pure academics, which probably meant it was exactly the right approach. When do we start? I asked. Our first joint expedition to the Maria Fernanda was scheduled for early spring. After I'd been fully cleared for diving again, we spent weeks planning, researching, and preparing. Michelle applied for research permits and lined up museum partnerships. I handled the practical logistics, boat charters, diving equipment, safety protocols. The week before we were scheduled to leave, Michelle moved in with me officially. She'd been staying at my place more nights than not anyway, but making it permanent felt like a big step. Are you sure about this? I asked as we carried the last boxes of her books up to my apartment. Living with a treasure hunter might damage your academic reputation. Let them talk, she said, wrapping her arms around my waist. I'm building a new kind of reputation. Besides, I like waking up next to you every morning. Even when I wake up at 5 a.m. to check weather reports, especially then. Though I reserve the right to complain about it occasionally. That night, as we made love surrounded by boxes of her belongings, I felt like we were finally building something together that was bigger than either of our individual careers. The morning we left for the Maria Fernanda site, I was nervous. In a way I hadn't been before a dive in years. This wasn't just about treasure hunting or academic research. It was about proving that Michelle and I could work together, that our relationship could survive the pressures of a challenging professional partnership. The wreck site was 100 miles offshore, in water that was crystal clear but nearly 200 feet deep. Technical diving at its most demanding. We would need to use mixed gas and plan for significant decompression stops. Last chance, too. Back out, I told Michelle as we anchored over the target coordinates. Not a chance, she said, already suiting up. I've been dreaming about this wreck for months. The Maria Fernanda was spectacular, a nearly intact 17th century merchant vessel lying on her side in a sandy depression. Schools of tropical fish had made their home in her rigging, and coral formations dotted her hull like jewelry. But it was the artifacts visible, even from a distance, that made my heart race. Cannons, pottery, what looked like chests and boxes scattered around the debris field. Michelle and I worked together with a synchronization that surprised me. She would identify areas of archaeological interest, and I would figure out the safest way to recover items without damaging them. We photographed everything in place before moving it, documented the exact location of each find, and treated every artifact with reverence. On our third dive, we found it, a sealed chest wedged beneath a fallen beam, preserved by the lack of oxygen and protected from marine growth. It took 2 more dives and some creative rigging to extract it safely, but when we finally got it to the surface, we both knew we'd found something special. Should we open it here? I asked as we floated beside the boat during our safety stop. Michelle's eyes were bright with excitement behind her mask. She nodded enthusiastically. Back on deck, we carefully pried open the chest's corroded lock. Inside, wrapped in what had once been oilcloth, were the personal belongings of someone who had been aboard the Maria Fernanda when she went down. Letters written in Spanish, jewelry, coins, and most remarkably, a leather-bound journal that had somehow survived 3 centuries underwater. My God, Michelle whispered carefully, lifting out the journal. This could rewrite what we know about colonial trade routes. I picked up one of the pieces of jewelry, a gold locket with an intricate design, and this could pay for our next expedition. Michelle looked at me sharply, then saw that I was smiling. Very funny, that locket is going to a museum. Which museum pays the best? I asked innocently. She splashed me with seawater, and I pulled her into my arms. Both of us laughing and giddy with the success of our find dot. Our discovery made waves in both the salvage and archaeological communities. The journal from the Maria Fernanda contained detailed accounts of trade negotiations, weather patterns, and daily life aboard a colonial merchant vessel. Michelle's analysis revealed new information about Spanish colonial economic policies, while the artifacts I'd recovered provided physical evidence to support the written accounts. More importantly, our collaborative approach gained attention from museums, universities, and even government agencies interested in developing new models for underwater cultural heritage preservation. We've been invited to present our findings at the International Conference on Maritime Archaeology, Michelle told me 6 months after our first expedition, in Barcelona. They want us to keynote the session on innovative preservation techniques. Us? They want a treasure hunter at an academic conference? They want the team that's revolutionizing how we think about underwater archaeology, she corrected. Besides, your presentation on advanced recovery techniques for fragile artifacts is brilliant. The conference was a triumph. Our joint presentation received a standing ovation, and we fielded questions for nearly an hour afterward. But more than the professional recognition, I was struck by how naturally Michelle and I worked together in front of an audience, finishing each other's thoughts and supporting each other's expertise. That night, we celebrated at a small restaurant overlooking the Mediterranean. The Spanish coast reminded me of the Florida Keys, but there was something magical about sharing it with Michelle in the city where her grandparents had been born. I have something for you, Michelle said as we walked along the beach after dinner. She pulled out a small box, and for a moment, my heart stopped. But instead of a ring, the box contained a pendant, a piece of silver worked into the shape of an anchor with a small emerald at its center. It's from the Maria Fernanda, she said. I had it cleaned and mounted by a jeweler in Key West. The emerald was loose in the chest, probably from a piece that deteriorated. I thought you should have something from our first discovery together. I fastened the chain around my neck, feeling the weight of the pendant settle against my chest just above my pacemaker scar. It's beautiful. But Michelle, this belongs in a museum with the rest of the collection. No, she said firmly. This belongs with you. It represents what we built together, something valuable that we brought up from the depths, preserved and made into something new. I kissed her there on the beach, tasting salt and wine and possibility. I love you, I whispered against her lips. I love you too, and Natalie ... She pulled back to look into my eyes. I want to build something permanent with you. Not just professionally, but personally. I want us to be partners in every sense of the word. What are you saying? Michelle dropped to one knee in the sand, pulling out another small box, this one containing a simple but elegant diamond ring. I'm saying that life is short and the ocean is vast, and I don't want to navigate either one without you. Natalie Chen, will you marry me? I stared at her kneeling in the moonlight, this brilliant, passionate woman who had changed my entire world. 6 months ago, I'd been trending in headlines about some billionaire's proposal that had nothing to do with me. Tonight, I was getting a proposal that would change everything. Yes, I said, pulling her up to kiss her. Yes, absolutely yes.